Can Jalen Green be the face of the Houston Rockets? Will Alperen Şengün live up to his potential as perhaps the next baby Jokic? Amen Thompson, what's he going to bring to the table? And Dillon Brooks and Fred VanVleet, too much money or good signings? Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for this video as we are going to break down the Houston Rockets with a very in-depth season preview looking at what this team is, their new acquisitions, who they lost through free agency and trade. We're also going to take a look at that existing young core, some of the new additions they brought in as well, in guys like Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore. I'm really buzzing about this team. I hope you Rockets fans are as well. If you are, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content as well. And without further ado, let's jump into it here on what I'm deeming the young and the restless. So in today's video, we're going to talk about those key additions. As I mentioned, we'll look at those departures. We'll take a good glance at the depth chart and what that kind of means for some of those young guys, where they're going to find minutes. What is that situation going to entail for Ime Udoka in his first season as the Rockets head coach? We're going to also look at the good, the bad, and the ugly from last season for the Houston Rockets. Emphasis on the bad and the ugly. There was a lot of that, but there were some good little pieces that we saw from the Houston Rockets last year. We're going to take a look at the style and scheme that the Rockets might employ this next season. Of course, we have not seen Ime Udoka actually coach the Rockets yet, but looking at what he did in Boston, I have a good indication as to what he could perhaps bring down to H-Town. And then the 2023-2024 predictions will round out the video. What do I expect of this team going into 2023-2024 after we've broken down all the film and looked at all of the advanced data and statistics that we've needed to kind of get a good rationalized feeling about what this situation is going to entail down in Houston. So let's take a look at those key acquisitions, and I think the best place to start is with those two high price point, well-known veterans, point guard Fred VanVleet and forward Dillon Brooks. Now, Fred VanVleet signed a 2-year contract with a team option in the third year, and I think that's a really important thing to note. Fred VanVleet signs for max money at the 30% threshold because he has not made All-NBA in his career, so he's not eligible for the 35% max. So this is no super max contract. This is nothing gigantic for the Houston Rockets, but it is pretty sizable money at over $40+ million a year for Fred VanVleet, who, yes, he's been an all-star in the past, but I wouldn't necessarily label him an all-star performer right now. And you also look at Dillon Brooks getting 4 years north of $80 million with the Houston Rockets, and I think a lot of people had issues with that contract specifically because of how the playoffs went for Dillon Brooks, where, you know, he famously, quote-unquote, poked the bear of LeBron James, and it did not end well for the Memphis Grizzlies, and those Bears did not want him anymore on their roster. So people were confused about, oh, what's the market for Dillon Brooks? Here's one thing I have to say. Signing NBA contracts is not necessarily about what other team's going to give him that money. This is not an auction place. It's not really how this works. You don't have to outbid somebody, especially dollar for dollar. When you're a team like Houston, who had a 22-60 record last year, you have to outbid your current resume, the kind of team that you are. For Dillon Brooks, a guy who is all about winning, wants to win, wants to be in playoff moments, the Rockets couldn't promise him that. So because of that, they had to promise him more dollars, and that's exactly what they did in getting Dillon Brooks. Now, I think it's very important to note that there was a lot of interest in Brook Lopez. In fact, I believe that they made moves to open up a pathway to bring him in with cap space. Ultimately, Brook Lopez returned to the Milwaukee Bucks, so you do not see him on the key acquisitions list. So instead, they turned around and targeted some other veterans. They got forward Jeff Green, who I think is a really good locker room guy for this unit. I think they really needed a player like him. Jock Landale steps in as kind of a backup big for them. I'm very interested to see what he does for this team and how many minutes per game he plays. We'll talk about that in the depth chart a little bit later. And then the two key acquisitions through the draft, guard Amen Thompson and forward Cam Whitmore. Both really exciting young players, both great athletes, and not just great athletes in terms of the normal U.S. population. I'm talking great athletes in the NBA. Amen Thompson has probably one of the best functional athletic skill sets coming into the league already, and Cam Whitmore is a really good, strong, powerful leaper, especially in clear space and even around some contact at times. Cam Whitmore does rise above and do a lot of nice things. So this is a really interesting acquisition pool here for Houston. You got some nice veterans. You've also brought in two really intriguing, good young players, in my opinion, that I think are going to have a pretty positive impact on this organization. And again, this is why I deem this team the young and the restless. They've got three guys currently who are, in my opinion, high priority players that are under 21 years old at the time I'm recording. Jabari Smith, Amen Thompson, Cam Whitmore. They also have three other really notable players under the age of 23. Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün, Tari Eason. You could also look at Kevin Porter Jr., who's, I believe, 23 years old as well. And then you also bring in these veterans who are the restless players, the guys who want to win, the guys who are, playing for not only their current contract, but for future contracts in the league as well. Dylan Brooks at 27 years old, Fred VanVleet 29, Jock Landale is 27, and then Jeff Green is 36. Who knows if this is his last contract in the league or not? Who knows if he spends the entire duration of it in Houston? But what I do know is the Rockets wanted to get better now, and that's exactly what they went out and did, signing Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet. Also going out and getting Jock Landale. We'll talk about that again here in a second. And then Jeff Green at 36 years old, I do think was a really nice positive improvement for that organization and that roster. So let's go ahead now and jump into those rookies, and boy are they dynamic. Amen Thompson from Overtime Elite, really incredible athlete, and Cam Whitmore likewise out of Villanova. Now I think that they do it in very different ways. For me, they were ranked 3rd and 7th on my big board this past year by the end of the draft cycle. That's where I settled on with these two guys. I've loved Amen Thompson the entire process. I've been pretty high on Cam Whitmore, but specifically Amen's the guy for me who might end up being the guy in Houston. Now listen, I love Jalen Green. I think Alperen Şengün's got a lot of potential, especially on the offensive end. I think we can talk about his defense too a little bit in this video that is going to break down why he's not as much of a net negative. But you're going to be seeing clips of Amen Thompson and really what this guy is. And from the functional athleticism standpoint, he is just the perfect blend of leaping ability, side-to-side mobility, agility, downhill speed. He does it all. And he's able to do it with some skill involved as well. He's got a really good handle of the basketball. He's a very unique finisher around the rim with his ability to hang, take contact, absorb it, and then still finish. He's also very good and adept at avoiding contact, which is a really unique blend to see someone good through contact and good around contact. Those are very different things, but he's good at both of them. And then really the most important aspect of Amen's game is his facilitating. In Summer League, we saw a ton of clips of Amen Thompson, even in just the one game he played against the Portland Trailblazers in Summer League. I just couldn't take my eyes off the screen. He's such a cerebral player, despite having all this high-end athleticism, and usually you see prospects like that who they've just been so good athletically that they haven't had to really think the game. Amen Thompson not only beats people with his skill and athleticism, he also beats people with his brain. And because of that, I really do think Amen Thompson might end up becoming one of the best players in the league at some point, and I chose my words very carefully there. I'm talking about MVP type play. Cam Whitmore was the Summer League MVP, put up some really nice performances in the Summer League. It was really shocking to me that he dropped all the way down to number 20, where the Houston Rockets were able to snag him in the draft. That was a very impressive night by Rafael Stone and the Houston Rockets, where they were able to grab, again, two guys who were in the top 7 on my big board. I thought both of them were locks to go in the top 10. Cam Whitmore ended up having a unprecedented slide, honestly, with people having questions about what was happening. Was there health concerns? Was it issues with interviews? Whatever it was, teams made mistakes because Cam Whitmore should have been a top 10 pick. And I really like what both of these guys are going to give Houston defensively as well in terms of defensive playmaking, upward mobility in terms of defending. Cam Whitmore is very strong, uses his hands and body well to defend. I think he'll be able to guard 2 through 4 once he really hits the prime of his career. And then Amen Thompson, this guy's a total wild card because at 6'7", he's got the foot speed and the agility, as I mentioned earlier, to guard point guards, but he's athletic enough and lengthy enough with a 7-foot plus wingspan to probably guard 4s. So you're looking at a player who really is going to perhaps grow into a Swiss Army knife defensively, especially with how smart of a player he is. And because of that, I think Houston's got a really good set of rookies to kind of bring into the fold this year. And I think that they're going to be a really integral part of what this team ends up becoming over the next 4, 5, 6 years. But already starting next season, we're going to see these two probably play a good amount, especially Amen Thompson, who was the 4th pick in the draft. Now looking at those departures, who has left the team? And part of this comes through that Brook Lopez situation where the Rockets traded out some of those young guys, former first-round picks, to clear up space, and ended up not using that space for anybody. Of course, ended up signing Dylan Brooks later. All the situation. They wanted Brook Lopez. Brook Lopez was at the top of their board after Fred VanVleet. Did not get it done, but they did trade away Ty Washington, who actually led the team in assist to turnovers last year. Now, Washington didn't play a ton of minutes, so it's not really that big of a deal. I do think he could have an interesting career ahead of him still in the right situation if he does get an opportunity. Usman Garuba, a guy who I really liked when he came out of Real Madrid. Just a bummer that we haven't seen him really on a good team yet, or a team that could use him. I really highlighted him as a player once Ime Udoka took the job that could have broke out in a big way, because I think his defensive versatility, ability to guard across multiple positions would have been great for Udoka's system, but ultimately we'll never see Garuba likely play for Udoka in his career. He's now out in Oklahoma City. KJ Martin was traded to the Clippers as well. Kind of a surprise one for me here out of the entire list. He's probably the most surprising. He is known for his thunderous dunks and had a lot of awesome moments in a Rockets uniform. Of course, requested a trade an offseason ago. Didn't get it last year, but he does ultimately find himself now in a different city. And then Daishen Nix, Rockets fans probably rejoicing even seeing his name up here on that departure list, because Steven Silas was known for playing Daishen Nix way too many minutes. So ultimately, he will not be on the Rockets roster this next season. So Rockets fans rejoice. Now let's look at the Houston Rockets depth chart, and let's start at the point guard spot. Fred VanVleet and Amen Thompson. Now, I did not include multiple players at multiple spots, so Amen Thompson's only on here one time. Listen, he's going to play minutes with Fred VanVleet. I'd be shocked if he didn't. You're going to see guys kind of interchanged and moved around throughout this, especially with how positionless today's game is. It's basically, are you a perimeter player or a guy who doesn't shoot? And are you someone who can defend the perimeter, or are you an interior defender? That's really what we're talking about. And then really the only specification on that is, are you a main primary ball handler creator? The point guards, the primary offense creators, offense initiators for the team this year will be likely Fred VanVleet and Amen Thompson, which I think is really good. I think that's a great improvement from where they were a year ago with Kevin Porter Jr. as the starting point guard. Now they have at the shooting guard spot Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr., which I think is, again, really good to see KPJ probably move into more of a natural role for himself, which for a long time on the channel here I've been talking about how I think Kevin Porter Jr. could really flourish as a sixth man, and I think that we're going to get to see that this year. Now there's some people who believe maybe he starts. I don't really see a starting spot for him based on the salaries and kind of the pedigree of some of the other guys like Green and Jabari, who were top picks. But perhaps, maybe there's a way, and with some injuries, Porter Jr. will definitely start some games this year. Dylan Brooks will start at the 3, from what I'm assuming. Cam Whitmore and Jae'Sean Tate will probably share those backup 3 minutes. I'm very interested to see how much Cam Whitmore plays his rookie season. Amen Thompson, in my opinion, is a lock to play a lot during his rookie year. Cam Whitmore, I'm a little less certain on, although I think he will play a decent amount. He kind of fits the archetype of what Ime Udoka likes to coach with, if you look back at his relationship with Jaylen Brown. Power forward, Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, and also Jeff Green. Now, Jeff Green probably not playing a ton of regular season minutes if I had to guess, but he will definitely get on the floor. And when he is, he'll probably throw down on somebody. But I do really like that Bari and Tari combination. They killed it a draft ago. I think Raphael Stone's drafting he's done a really good job, in my opinion, with the NBA draft. Jabari Smith, lights out shooter. Now, I know he didn't shoot very well his rookie season, but I'm expecting an uptick there with better point guard play around him. And then Tari, we'll talk about him a little bit more later, but man, can that guy rebound the ball, and he does a lot of crazy stuff physically. This might be one of the best athlete teams in the league in terms of the strength, athleticism, jumping ability, the downhill speed. There's a lot to love with this team from the physical standpoint of basketball. And then when we're talking about the skill, Alperen Sengun might be one of the most skilled big men in the league. We'll talk about him a little bit more later on. And then you also have Jock Landale, which I think that center spot is really the one, if we could highlight one here, would be the most important position to watch for the Houston Rockets with Ime Udoka. And how do those center minutes get broken up? Is Alperen Sengun a 35-minute per game player? Does he play 30 minutes per game, or does he only play 25 minutes per game? And it might not sound like a huge difference. It is. It's a massive difference for what the Houston Rockets internally believe about Alperen Sengun and what his actual production will look like this next season, because I think he's a very talented player. We'll talk about that more later on. But now's the time to rehash the good, the bad, and the ugly for the Houston Rockets from the 2022-2023 season. And really, we have to dive into where this team was to understand where they're about to go. And of course, yes, I did have to include Stephen Silas on the ugly part of the graphic because he did not help things at all in Houston. So, looking at the good, this team was 6th in the NBA in fouls drawn. And actually, they didn't foul that much either, which is a really good sign. Even for a young team, to be drawing a lot of fouls means you're putting yourself in advantage situations. You're creating advantage, and the other team, while trying to guard you, is only able to stop you by using illegal contact, which is where the fouls occur. I was really surprised when I was digging up all of my data for this video to see them 6th in fouls drawn. Of course, it does make some sense when you look at the actual players on the roster, specifically Jalen Green, who of course is a really good downhill player. He averaged 6.1 free throws a game last year. Kevin Porter Jr. shot 4.5 free throws a game. Şengün shot nearly 4 free throws a game as well. KJ Martin was just under 3 free throws a game. Of course, now he's with the Los Angeles Clippers. But this Rockets team really leverages their athleticism and kind of their functional strength into advantageous situations, getting to the line, drawing fouls, putting the other team in the bonus early. Those are all really good signs that this Rockets team has a lot of talent and a lot of ability to probably take massive steps forward over the next year or 2 or 3. They were also number 1 in rebound percentage and second chance points as well in the entire NBA, which that's a testament here to Tari Eason. Tari Eason averaged 2.4 offensive rebounds a game, which is very impressive, especially for a rookie who isn't really a true center. He's just more of this hybrid athletic forward. He does a lot of great things. I love Tari Eason's athleticism. I love his kind of willingness to go get the basketball. If you look back at his time at LSU and even before that Cincinnati, he was always somebody who his production was off the charts. And, you know, the kind of question on him was, can he learn plays? Well, the nice thing is for Stephen Silas, that didn't even matter. Now, I think that's going to be an important note here going to play for Ime Udoka, but ultimately, Tari Eason was really, really good as a rookie. I love that pick for the Rockets last year when they took him. And then Alperen Şengün, over a 10% offensive rebound percentage, which it doesn't blow you away, but it's worth noting. This guy can hit the boards. There's rumors that he's gotten a lot taller over the offseason, which I think is going to be a really great sign for the Houston Rockets too, if that is true. And then another very impressive statistic here for the Rockets. Not only are they drawing fouls, not only are they rebounding the ball and getting second chance points, they're also finishing around the rim. They had a positive differential in points in the paint. They only gave up about 49 points in the paint last year per game. This past year, they averaged nearly 55 points in the paint themselves. That +6 differential, again, it doesn't sound like a lot, but that is a real differentiator between them and other teams across the league. Finishing 5th as a very young team is really impressive. Again, that kind of fits into the team's skill set. Jalen Green as a shot maker, a downhill slasher. You also look at Alperen Şengün, very advanced post-up game. Now, he is a little liable to turning the ball over sometimes with traveling violations because he's rather aggressive with some of his footwork sometimes. But it's all for the betterment of the Rockets and their development, which is really the most important thing from this past year. And there wasn't a lot of good to pull from. I'm very happy to see these stats that I found because these are all some really great things that the Rockets did last year, which I think kind of got under-talked about. But the most important thing was that the young guys got a lot of minutes, they got a lot of reps, and as their careers develop, some of them will be asked to scale back, which means their efficiency likely rises. Some of them will probably be asked to do even more. And because of these early career repetitions that they got, early career opportunities to showcase and display and use their talent, they're going to be in better situations going forward because of this experience. Now, again, it hasn't been pretty. It hasn't really translated to winning, but it's going to at some point. And I think that's really the thing you have to hold on to for hope here for the Houston Rockets. Let's take a look at a specific player. I'll tell you right now, player A plays for the Houston Rockets. Let's look at his year 1 and year 2 splits. 17.3 points per game, 2.6 assists, 3.4 rebounds. a little bit under 1 steal a game, a little bit under half a block per game, and the shooting split's not so great. 42.6%, 34 from 3, and just a little bit under 80% from the line. Let's compare that to player B quick, who averaged just about 14 points per game, the exact same assists per game numbers, less rebounds than player A, less steals than player A, the same number of blocks as player A, and essentially the exact same efficiency, slightly better free throw shooting from player B. Then you also look at year 2, the exact same points per game from player A and player B. Player A actually had more assists per game, player A also had more rebounds per game, slightly less steals and blocks per game, and roughly similar efficiencies. Again, the 3-point uptick for player B was notable, and also the free throw shooting of player B, again, just edged out player A in this setting, but people are really low on player A. And player A, I'm going to tell you, is Jalen Green. People are calling him a shot chucker, and this is the most important part of the video. This is the part everyone's got to hear. Player A is Jalen Green, and player B is Devin Booker, his first 2 years in the league. And I think this is a really, really important note. Not everyone comes into the league like Luka Doncic. You're not going to step in and be a guy who is on great efficiency, impacting winning at the highest level immediately. Those players do not come around very often, if ever, usually. And Jalen Green has been really the subject of, oh, well, shot chucker and inefficient and empty calories type player. That's the narrative around him right now, and we need to really fight back on that, especially you Rockets fans. Hopefully you guys are enjoying the video, by the way. You guys got to fight back on this, because Jalen Green, right now, the same way Devin Booker did, got labeled empty calories. I remember his 70-point game where they lost and everyone was flaming Devin Booker. Listen, it's all about the talent. The talent is there with Jalen Green. He's put up a ton of 30-point games in his career, a ton of 40-point games in his career. Are there inefficient nights? 110%. He was also playing on a team that really had no structure, doesn't have a true point guard around him up until now, and he was still putting up, I think, very impressive numbers. And Player B, Devin Booker, years 1 and 2 of his career were, first of all, really important to his development, but also kind of a runway into him growing into a star. And I think player A, Jalen Green, has a little bit of superstardom that he can run into here at some point. And I'm really buying all the stock I can on Jalen Green right now, because I'm a big believer in this guy's game. I think he's going to be a fantastic player in the NBA for years to come. And I think people right now are really, really low on him for really no reason. He's really, really young yet. Give him some more time. Let him continue to grow as a player. Progression isn't linear. Shooting splits don't get better every single year. But Jalen Green's due for a breakout at some point, and I think it could come as soon as year 3 of his career. Talking about another guy who I think is due for a breakout, it is Alperen Şengün. Averaged about 15 points a game last year. 9 rebounds a night. We highlighted that offensive rebounding percentage earlier. Just under 4 assists per game, which is a very impressive mark for a center. We'll talk about that in a second. And he shot 55% from the field. I think that's a really under-talked about statistic from Alperen Şengün, who actually had a pretty efficient year for himself. For kind of my points per possession squad out there, 55% from the field means that Alperen Şengün basically was a 1.10 point per possession player throughout his second season in the NBA, which is a very solid offensive player from an individual standpoint when it comes to shooting the basketball. 33.3% on threes. Now, pretty low volume. He shot 0.8 threes a game, so it's not like he's this dominant stretch big yet, but I think that's a good sign that he grew from 25% as a rookie to 33% as a sophomore player. 71.5% from the line. You'd like to see that uptick a little bit more, but I don't really think that's very problematic, at least at this point. And when it comes to Şengün, there's a lot of questions of, is he baby Jokic? Is he the next Nikola Jokic? And honestly, you know, for the most part, I've kind of been like, we should slow down on that. There's not going to be another Nikola Jokic. He's such a special player. He's one of the best players to ever play the game from a talent standpoint. But if I had to pick a runner-up to who the next Jokic could be, it's probably Alperen Şengün. He finished 5th in assists per game among centers. Remember my graphic earlier. He is super young yet. He's doing this at a really young age. And he put up 29 double-doubles while still finishing 21st in usage among centers. This was one of my biggest complaints about the Silas era in Houston. It just felt like he had no understanding how to use a guy like Alperen Şengün, which doesn't surprise me. Stephen Silas comes from the Dallas Mavericks coaching tree. Never really, under Rick Carlisle, had a player like Alperen Şengün, so he didn't really know how to coach a guy like Alperen Şengün, and didn't really know how to utilize a guy like Alperen Şengün, which is kind of the hub of an offense, get him mid-post touches, use him in a lot of different ways, get him the ball in short rolls, let him be a decision maker, and they didn't really have the guard play to facilitate that either. So I don't necessarily blame everything on Stephen Silas, but to be honest, he could have just been utilized so much better and so much more, and I think that's really important to note. And my question here, you might be confused what I mean, can Ime Udoka be Michael Malone? And what I'm asking here is, can Ime Udoka build a really high quality defense around somebody who maybe isn't going to be a great individual defender at a very important position to be good defensively, which is the center spot in the NBA? And I think the Rockets are going to have some workarounds that we're going to talk about later on in this video, but that's really the big question that faces Alperen Şengün, in whether or not he can become the next Nikola Jokic, or at least a baby version of Jokic going forward. Then let's take a look at Jabari Smith, who, by all accounts, I think had a pretty disappointing rookie season. I don't think that's unfair to say for the guy who was drafted 3rd overall in a draft that had a lot of good players. He just didn't have a great rookie season, but he still had some really nice moments. He averaged nearly 13 points a game, 7 rebounds a night, and I think one really important statistic that needs to get highlighted here, because we're going to build off of it later, nearly 1 block per game for Jabari Smith as a rookie. And he's got the wingspan, he's got the length, he's got the height at 6'11", and he's got the defensive history to be a really versatile forward defender in today's modern NBA, where forwards are sometimes asked to protect the rim, sometimes they're asked to guard out in space, sometimes they have to guard ones. I think Jabari Smith has a lot of different versatility that he can offer for the Houston Rockets going forward, and I think Ime Udoka is going to fall in love with having this guy on his roster for a really good reason, because I think there's a lot to work with here for Jabari Smith going forward. Now, you look at the shooting splits, and you might want to throw up in your mouth a little bit. 41% from the field, not good. 31% from 3, that's alarming, because coming out of Auburn, I thought the one thing that was going to really translate well for him was his ability to shoot the ball. Now, this is not slanderous what I'm about to say about the Houston Rockets, because long-term this might end up working out great. But from a year one perspective, the Rockets were probably the worst place Jabari Smith could have went from an efficiency standpoint, because they just did not have a true creation guard for other players. KPJ was asked to do that. I don't think he did a terrible job, but he was just not equipped to be a primary point guard for a team that's going to find a lot of success. And Jabari Smith, because of that, struggled. Now, I think with Fred VanVleet, Amen Thompson, we're going to naturally see Jabari Smith take huge steps forward, huge strides forward. And I really want to stay on that topic of buying stock of Houston Rockets. The amount of stock I've bought recently in Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün, and Jabari Smith is off the charts. I really believe in this Rockets young trio. You throw Amen Thompson in there, who I gushed about earlier. I love this Rockets young core, and I still think there's so much upside, so much potential that, people are going to freak out, like I said, and say, oh, well, they're not winning yet, they're not efficient, this, that, and the other thing. They're young. Give them some time. Be really patient with these guys, because I think there's a lot that can come out of this team that's going to be really, really, really good in the NBA. Then let's highlight Kevin Porter Jr. here, who by no accounts did he have a bad season. Now, I kind of find myself in disagreement with a lot of Rockets fans. People, I know that a lot of people believe Kevin Porter Jr. had a really good season. I myself do not, but I'm not really looking at just the numbers to make that claim. His numbers were fine. In fact, they're pretty good. 19.2 points per game, 5.7 assists per game, 5.3 rebounds a game. He actually had a triple-double this season as well, which was an awesome moment for the Rockets and for KPJ individually, who I've been pulling for since he was in his own draft class. I've loved Kevin Porter Jr. for a long time, but I don't think from an actual offensive organization standpoint and, kind of setting others up, I don't think he had a very good year. But he did, have some of those raw stats in there that present it like he had a really good season. 44% from the field, 36% from three, 78% from the line. Now, he is getting to a point in his career where, he's been in the league for a while now. So we're hoping to see some real good growth in terms of impacting winning, the defensive side of the floor. The clock's ticking a little bit on KPJ, but I know he has a lot of kind of trust and goodwill built up within that Houston Rockets organization. Tillman Fertitta really likes him. And I think KPJ is a good player. I mean, he's a skilled shot maker, really nice handle, and I think he can do a lot of really great things for a team, especially when his role is scaled back a little bit into what I think, again, six-man role. I think he could be really, really good in that type of role where not only is he productive and efficient, but he's probably impacting winning in a good amount. And I think Ime Udoka is going to find that good blend of how much should KPJ play and in what situations. And if he finds that and kind of utilizes that correctly, it's going to be really essential in the Rockets taking a big step forward this next season. So, we talked about the good, let's get to the bad. 110.5 offensive rating, which is not good, and in fact, they actually had the worst half-court offensive rating in the league. Now, this team was actually not that fast in terms of the pace that they played with. They ranked 14th in the NBA in pace, which was pretty surprising to me. Now, I think that's somewhat of an effort from Stephen Silas to slow things down and maybe get a little bit organized. Now, it didn't really work out that well for them, which was kind of a surprising little tad bit of information I, kind of uncovered in prepping this video. Their opponent three-point percentage, they gave up 37.4% on threes, which for those of you who do not know is a bottom 5 mark in the league. In fact, I believe it's bottom 3 maybe. They gave up a lot of three-pointers. Team shot really well against them. The perimeter defense was just not good. Their rotations were never dialed in. A lot of issues with this team from the defensive side of the floor. They also had the 7th worst pick and roll offense in the league based on points per possession according to NBA advanced data. And then they also allowed 1.09, a little correction there on the graphic, allowed 1.09 points per possession on post-ups, which was actually worst in the league. Now, it's not super high volume. You don't see a lot of offenses run out of post-up situations, but I do think that's one of those flaws around Alperen Şengün and some of the other bigs that they had on the roster, where they just, quite frankly, did not do a great job defending post-ups and interior presences at all. So I think that's going to be an area of growth. That's kind of why Jock Landale is going to be important for this team. And we'll see what that ends up entailing, right? There's going to be guys who have to step up. There's going to be guys that Ime Udoka leans on for this team, and they're going to have to clear up some of this bad play that we saw from them a year ago. And kind of to preface some of the ugly, I think looking at their record and some of the flaws in this team is probably the best way to set the entire stage for us. 2022-2023 season, they went 22-60, which was tied second worst in the league. They actually ended the year on a small win streak, which kind of saved their record, or at least the way it looked. They were 5-4 in 3-point or less games, which is actually a really good piece of information here. So when the going got tough and the clutch came to be, which wasn't very often clearly, with only 9 games in an 82-game sample, they went 5-4. That's a really good record in 3-point or less games. They had, however, 36 losses of 10 plus points, which means they got blown out a lot. 10-point losses in the NBA are blowouts. Honestly, if you look at the way that the NBA kind of is in terms of parity and how close the games typically are, if you're losing by 10 plus points consistently, you're a really bad team. And not only does the record indicate that, but the amount of losses. 36 of those 60 losses were gigantic losses, and honestly what I would label as uncompetitive losses, which is not what you want at all for a group of young guys, which is why I think some of those signings were really good for the Rockets. But let's take a look at the ugly. They ranked dead last in team 3-point percentage. They didn't shoot a lot of threes, and when they did, they definitely did not go in very often. They were last in team assists. Now, part of that is a byproduct of the team not making a lot of perimeter shots, but it also kind of preaches to my point earlier on the team's not organized, the team doesn't have a true facilitator, at least they didn't last year. They have the second most turnovers in the NBA. They actually had the worst assist to turnover ratio in the entire league. And oh, by the way, their defense was god awful. They gave up the most fast break points per game. Their transition defense was horrendous. Their half-court defense wasn't much better. Their defensive rating was 118.6, which for reference basically means that they were on par, giving up basically the best offensive rating night to night in the league. They were just flat out bad defensively. The team was not good at all in any capacity on the defensive end of the floor, and I think that's something where you're going from Steven Silas, who had them really not organized. The team was just dysfunctional, disorganized, whatever you want to label them as. They were really, really bad. Whereas we transition into a guy like Ime Udoka, who he's known as a defensive-minded coach. And I think he's a really smart defensive mind. I think he's going to completely overhaul what this Rockets team was doing from a year ago, and quite frankly, the last 3 years, into what this team is likely going to become over the next year or two, which is a really stout, good defensive team, which is just a drastic turnaround from what they've been. And I really think this Ime Udoka addition is one of the most important of the entire offseason across players, coaches, whatever you want to talk about. In fact, I should have had Ime Udoka on the key acquisition slide, because oh my gosh, is this guy important, because he's going to bring a level of accountability to the Rockets organization. He's going to play the guys he wants to play. Listen, I talked about pedigree earlier. I do think that's going to play into who the starters are at the beginning of the season. Flat out, if Jabari Smith Jr. is playing terribly, which I'm not expecting, or if Jalen Green plays terribly, which again I'm not expecting, but if they do, Ime Udoka will sit their bleeps down, and I really mean that. He will make the decisions that are best for the Rockets organization when it comes to winning and losing. That's not something the Rockets or Steven Silas was able to do at all in his tenure there with the Rockets. Now Ime Udoka comes in with kind of a different mindset. He's going to hold players accountable, and that's going to force guys to play defense, which is a really, really good step for the Rockets in terms of being a competitive defensive team. They're also going to be organized, and people think about organization as, oh, what's the spacing look like? And yes, that's a big part of it, but it also comes down to, okay, what's their transition defense going to look like? How many guys crashed? Yes, I talked about their offensive rebounding being really elite. Part of that was because they were disorganized and guys wouldn't get back in transition or never guard in transition. Udoka is going to find a healthy blend of getting on the glass, but also getting back and ensuring that we're not giving up 2-point bunnies or wide open 3-point looks in transition every single time down, every single opportunity the other team gets. They're also going to limit turnovers. They're going to run more sets. They're going to do more dribble handoff stuff. The Rockets actually ranked last in the league in points per possession using screens as well. So I think Ime Udoka is going to clear that up a little bit and just get them a little bit more competitive in those areas with a little bit better structure. The most important thing Ime Udoka can do for this organization is bring a defensive identity, and looking at what he did back in Boston, I think that's going to be a really safe bet to say that Ime Udoka completely transforms the way that this team defends, specifically in the half court with a variety of X's and O's schematic changes that is really important for his style of play on the defensive end of the floor, and something that honestly for the last couple of years I couldn't tell you what the Rockets were trying to accomplish on defense. Ime Udoka is going to bring a really good strong set of rules, guidelines, what do you do in this situation when, and he's going to coach it really, really well so that every player who steps on the floor understands, hopefully, that they're supposed to do this when this happens, and that kind of conditional if X then Y type of coaching is really good for an overall defensive identity and structure. And not only is it the defensive side of the ball that he's going to preach, it's also the other guys who got those big massive contracts in Houston that are going to have a little bit of impact in this as well. Fred VanVleet, I really like the addition of him into this team. He's really, really quick in terms of the way he moves his feet, tries to leverage his body to stay in front of guys. He's got very active hands, consistently in the top 5 in steals per game in the NBA. Now that played very well into Nick Nurse's defensive system where they were trying to pressure the ball, get a bunch of deflections, which they typically always did. Fred VanVleet was always a huge part of that for the Toronto Raptors, and I expect that to continue in Houston and really be a good tone setter for Ime Udoka, similar to what Marcus Smart used to do for the Boston Celtics. Now, VanVleet is not a Marcus Smart level defender. He doesn't switch as well, but he's going to bring a nice kind of energy and attention to detail defensively that this team badly needs. And then Dillon Brooks is going to be the real tone setter. And this is why, in my opinion, he was 110% worth the contract that they gave him because of the situation. The Rockets are such a bad defensive team over the last 3 years. They need a guy like Dillon Brooks, who was just all defense this past season for the Memphis Grizzlies. And he's going to set that tone by guarding the best player. He's going to, night in, night out, match up with the Luka Doncic's of the world. He's going to guard John Morant when they play the Grizzlies. He's going to guard Jason Tatum when they play the Celtics. He's going to be the guy that takes those big name matchups. He's going to go guard Kevin Durant when they play the Phoenix Suns. And he's going to usually do a pretty good job of that as well. He does a nice job leveraging his strength and his body positioning to winning defensive matchups, which I think is going to be really awesome. And he also brings the energy, gets down on the floor for loose balls, and he kind of brings that swagger to a team that I think honestly really badly needs it. There's not a lot of things to have swagger about when you're 22-60. I think Dillon Brooks, he's kind of got that irrational confidence where he's going to say, look, I'm going to step up and make some awesome plays. Now, there are flaws with both of these players. Dillon Brooks thinks he's a 20-point-per-game scorer when he quite frankly isn't. Fred VanVleet thinks he's one of the best transition pull-up three-point shooters in NBA history when quite frankly he isn't. These guys are not perfect players. There's a reason that their teams let them get to free agency, didn't give them massive extensions. But at the end of the day, the Houston Rockets had cap space. They had an opportunity to get bigger and better, and that's exactly what they did in free agency. I think it's a really good fit with Ime Udoka, who also I think is going to employ some of what we saw him do in Boston. And this is where the big men come into play. Specifically, the two I want to talk about, Alperen Şengün and Jabari Smith Jr. And I think this is going to be a really fascinating kind of discussion on what the Rockets are going to do defensively, because all of the narrative right now is around Alperen Şengün not being able to be a quality defender or a good defender. And I want to look back at what Boston did in the lone year Ime Udoka coached the team and led them to the finals. They ran a lot of two big lineups, which maybe Jock Landale kind of plays into this as well for Houston, where Al Horford would play predominantly the 4 and Robert Williams would play a lot of the 5. And Ime Udoka was really creative in his ability to kind of keep Robert Williams out of some of the main actions, keep him low in the play, keep him as a primary help side defender, not necessarily have him go up and play at the level of the screen all the time. Played a decent amount of drop coverage, which Boston has slowly transitioned into more and more over the years. Typically, we had thought about them as a switching team that kind of pivoted, and Ime Udoka is a big reason why, because with the size, he wanted rim protection, and the Celtics were consistently toward the top of the league in block shots. Robert Williams was a big reason why, but it's the way that Ime Udoka put him in positions to succeed defensively by keeping him around the rim as a help side guy. And I think, with Alperen Şengün, who isn't necessarily the best shot blocker, I think we might see him in the Al Horford role, where he steps out and is guarding a little bit more on the perimeter, which you might say, well, that sounds kind of scary. But this is the entire point. You have Jabari Smith Jr. back there as a really lengthy 6'11" forward with, again, good radius in terms of the wingspan. He's going to be able to block some shots. I highlighted that near 1 block per game this past year with really no structure. I think that Jabari Smith's defense is going to be something that could ascend into really, really upper echelon status and tiers, where the Rockets, if you have VanVleet, Amen Thompson, Dillon Brooks, and Jabari Smith Jr. around Alperen Şengün, that's a really good defensive core around a guy who maybe isn't an elite defender, but if you have him in the right positions, doing some of the right stuff, you can probably get away with it, and not only get away with it, find success doing it. I think that's going to be important for Houston, is seeing how kind of Udoka ties in his old system with what he did in Boston and how he brings it over to Houston and kind of adapts it and kind of manipulates what he was doing by probably using Şengün a little bit more in the pick and roll as kind of that, hedge defender, or a guy who plays at the level of the screen a bit more, and then Jabari Smith Jr. kind of being in that Robert Williams role, which hasn't really been talked about. I haven't heard anyone discuss that, but that's honestly what I expect to happen this year for the Houston Rockets. Now, is it possible that maybe they try and blitz the ball with Jabari Smith more in screens? That's a possibility too, but my expectation currently is that we're going to see Alperen Şengün probably playing more of kind of that power forward role defensively, and Jabari Smith Jr. kind of low-key being defensive center for the team, and kind of roving and ranging in center field defensively, which I think is going to be a really interesting thing to watch. So are the Houston Rockets ready for takeoff? And that's a really big question, and one that it's hard to answer, because there's a lot of ways that this Rockets situation could play out. They could be really, really good. All the young guys could take a huge step forward at the same time. Ime Udoka could bring in an entire different system and just really kind of unlock a lot of the existing players, while also the improvements from VanVleet and Dillon Brooks in terms of bringing them into the roster maybe it just unlocks everything and the Rockets become one of the better defensive teams, going from the worst or one of the worst to one of the best. And that alone could really shape their season. Now, I'm going to be a little bit more conservative in my predictions here, but I do think the Rockets are a lot better. Right now, remember, they won 22 games last year. I'm predicting them to win around 34 games this season. Now, listen, I'm making this prediction in August. By the time October rolls around, maybe I'll have a different feel. Who knows? Maybe James Harden gets traded, Damian Lillard gets traded. A lot of stuff can change between now and the start of the season, so don't lock me into this 34 wins. This is just kind of where I'm feeling right now. To be honest, if they won 37, 38 games, I wouldn't be shocked. If they won 40 games, I'd be a little surprised just with how good the West is. The West is really, really loaded this year, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. And right now, remember, I'm projecting them to win 12 more games than they did a year ago, which is a huge step in the right direction for the Houston Rockets. And I think a lot of that comes down to their internal development, the improvements by free agent signings of both Dillon Brooks and Fred VanVleet, and then also bringing in Ime Udoka, which again, I think was genius for this organization. I think that they will be in or around the play-in conversation. Now, if I had to guess, they probably do not make the playoffs just because there's a lot of teams in the Western Conference that are playoff caliber teams, in my opinion. There's really 11, 12 teams that should be in that play-in or playoff mix, period. And because of that, the Rockets might be one of those odd teams out, but it doesn't mean that they're bad, and it doesn't mean that those signings weren't worth it. Signings, even if it doesn't mean your team wins a bunch of games right now, I think the one thing that we need to talk about too, Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks are going to be good tone setters, not only just for the defensive side of the floor, but for the organization and some of the expectations that come along with playing for the Houston Rockets. I think that they're going to be the best role models Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün, Jabari Smith, Amen Thompson could potentially have. They're going to have players who care about winning, care about the defensive side of the floor, and want to play for future contracts. And because of that, they're going to take games, regular season games specifically, meaningfully. They're going to try and win. And I know that sounds like, oh, that should be the baseline expectation. Sometimes with some of these guys, it's not. And for the Rockets, I think that they needed those types of voices in the locker room. And there's going to be a narrative shift around this Rockets team. Right now, people are like, oh, well, the young core is not that good. They're not winning games. They're inefficient, this, that, and the other thing. Listen, people are going to say, a year from now, we can come back to this. They're going to be saying, this Rockets team is kind of loaded. They've got a lot of good young talent. Oh, my goodness. I think that they're going to be very impressed with what version of the Houston Rockets we see this upcoming season. And I think really the young guys are going to grow and some of them are going to pop. Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore are going to have elite moments. I think Amen Thompson specifically is going to really, really pop off the screen. He's going to be a lock to be all rookie first team, in my opinion, just with the numbers he's going to put up. He'll score, rebound the ball, and he'll get assists. I think he'll be solidly efficient from the field, probably not from three, but from the field, and he'll have some nice defensive moments. I think Jalen Green, this might be the year we see him take a huge step forward. Alperen Şengün with a higher usage rate. Remember, he was 21st among centers in the NBA in usage this past year. We could see him take a huge stride forward as well in terms of the individual statistics he puts up and kind of the amount of love he gets on social media and ESPN and some of the other national mainstream media that doesn't really watch Rockets games right now. I think this next year we'll probably start to hear them talk about the Rockets a little bit more with a little bit more excitement and vigor, which is really, really good to see for the Houston Rockets. And I just think this team's going to be so much better, and I'm really happy about that. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you did enjoy today's video. It was a lot of fun to record and talk about the Houston Rockets. I had a great time. I hope you did as well. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. There's a subscribe button right here in the middle for you, as well as my most recent video, which was an Indiana Pacers season preview, very similar style to this video. Go check that one out, and then also check out this recommended video for you too. Thanks again so much for watching, guys, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.